Hi everyone, on today's episode we're bringing you a very special guest, Mr. Paul Navin. Now, what makes Paul special? First of all, 40 years of experience in policing, but Paul has done something very few cops do, and that is going from a criminal investigation background, working as a designated detective, reaching the rank of detective sergeant, and then crossing over into the tactical field and becoming a sniper with the tactical operations unit. Paul has trained with the Secret Service, with FBI, with SAS. He has won 2 bravery awards. He's been part of 9 unit citations. He has resolved numerous hostage crises and armed and dangerous felon arrests. What he doesn't know about tactical policing probably fits on the back of a postage stamp. Guys, a great storyteller, a man that's got a book coming out, so be on the lookout for that. We're going to go through some of the important things that he's seen and done, but particularly we're going to talk about the early days in his investigations career and then moving through what his perspective is on the recent attempt on Donald Trump. So guys, this is going to be a big episode. I'd like to welcome Paul to the studio. Fabulous to have you here, my friend. I have to admit, there's been very few guests that I've spent like the last hour just talking to and hanging off their every word. So fanboy right here. But it is a very rare thing to see someone go from something like crime agencies. So, crime agencies existed in New South Wales before state crime. So you covered the state for all different things. But to go from a designated detective sergeant to working as a sergeant in the tactical operations unit, as a sniper, a very detail orientated, very skill specific kind of role. And there's very few people, I can only think of maybe one other person I've heard do it. I don't even know if that's accurate. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be on board.
Mate, you have done some amazing things. You started in the cops before I was even born, just to put that out there. You started in 1973.
Just looking at you, I sort of gathered that.
It took a lot of happiness in saying that. I thought.
You still look fitter than I am. That's the problem. So 1973, you joined the cops. You do 20 years as a detective and 20 years as a tactical operator. Yeah. Honestly, mate, it's amazing to me, some of the stories that we've been through. But look, tell me a little bit about your run to becoming a detective. Where did you start and how did you end up getting designated?
Yeah, look, 40 years, it's definitely, there's a lot to unpack there. There's no doubt about that. In my infancy, before joining the cops in 73, I was actually born in Waterloo. And then my inclination was not to be a police officer at all. I didn't know what I was going to be at the end of the day. But in the period of time, then I started thinking maybe because I played a lot of rugby league, and I was thinking maybe along the lines of, given what coaches and trainers were telling me, is that, you've got a future as you get older. I was thinking, yeah, okay, that'll be fine. Just keep going. I was working towards that, but the problem with that is, I was a skinny little kid. I just didn't have the weight, So push comes to shove, and we left the inner suburb of Waterloo and went to the sort of Green Valley housing estate then in about 1962. And when we went there, I'm thinking, this is a country location. And this was this was about 5 kilometres away from Liverpool. I think this is a country location. What are we doing here? There was only 2 houses in the street, ours and one other. You know what I mean? And I've been through, as I like to term it, the school of hard knocks. Yeah. Being raised in Waterloo and sort of running around Alexandria, Redfern, Newtown, all those areas,
And they were hard suburbs in those days, by my understanding.
Well, you're 100%, but the beauty of it is there were relatives and relations that lived on every street corner. So you felt reasonably secure and comfortable, in terms of, your Teflon bubble. We've all got Teflon bubbles, and at some point in time we're going to have to leave that Teflon bubble and experience the real world. That's what I've learned over the 40 years. fortunately, there are people that never leave the Teflon bubble, and that's a good thing. They never experience adversity or the like. So we moved out to the Housing Commission estate, and then I kept pushing through. I was still playing football for the South Sydney Juniors when we were living at Liverpool. I was going into the city and training 3 nights a week on a train and meet my father, and we'd come home and what have you. So the weight was always a problem, and it became evident to me, so I've got to start putting weight on here somehow or other, to sort of fulfil that goal of being a professional footballer, and it just wouldn't happen. Didn't matter what I ate or whatever. So I started going to the Cabramatta Police Boys Club to start pumping a bit of iron and trying to put on some meat. And I met 3 police cadets there, who have become lifelong friends. And as I like to refer to them, I refer to them as the 3 amigos, And they were cadets. So that was like an apprenticeship in that era. You practiced working in the station, you practiced doing menial tasks, typing and that sort of stuff. And then you go on to your next phase of policing, which is initial training, which is what they were doing. And the more I spoke to them, I just became intoxicated suddenly with policing. I said, this sounds like a good gig, it sounds an adventure. I might give this a crack. But when I told the amigos that I intended coming onto the cops, the first thing that they said was, "You're too skinny, you ain't
Gee.
you won't get the medical sort of thing." I said, "What?"
Today's issue is you're too fat.
I couldn't believe it. And I said, "I've just copped an earful from my father about not being big enough." And my father kept telling me, "You join the cops, you're going to get some toweling up." I said, "What?" I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to get a few items. Look how small you are, you're too skinny." I said, "Oh, okay." It was okay, all right.
It's skinny shaming.
It was, and it sticks in my headspace, that sort of thing, and I'd had no sort of experience outside of the 3 amigos in terms of, policing and that, but I did have an interesting adventure with the cops back in the early days at Waterloo when I think I was about 6 or 7. A couple of young mates up the road, they sort of said, "Listen, why don't we go down to this factory down here like they sort of make ball bearings?" I said, "Oh, it sounds interesting." And the two mates, I said, "Oh, there's a couple of holes in the fence. We'll just climb through and get the ball bearings." And I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to be in that. So I said, "But I would come along anyway."
I come and watch you get done.
Yeah, basically. So down we go, and I didn't have to go inside into the factory area. Like, there were ball bearings everywhere. We were going to use them to swap for marbles and that sort of stuff at school. So I find my ball bearings on the street and fill a little bag full. That was fantastic. And the 2 brothers come out, and we're sort of we've got our little ill-gotten gains. Oh, it was fantastic. And step outside, getting ready to walk home, and this massive voice, "Come here, you 3. I said, "Oh, what's going on?" I turn around. Sure enough, there was 2 sergeants of the police got out of a black car, and these guys looked like humongous wrestlers compared to my size. So, "Get over here." So over we go, and me being 6 or 7, I thought of be nice, show some manners. I said to one of them, "Do you intend taking us home?" And I don't think I got the last word out. I never got the last word out before I felt a boot really ramming into my bum. And it lifted me off the ground. Seriously. It brought tears to my eyes. And the other 2, they're just standing, and they dropped their bags of ball bearings, so to speak. And he said, "Get in the car." So I got in the car, and it was stinging. I just couldn't get over the stinging. So we get in the back of the police car, and he takes us home. But I've sort of got some I sort of got some revenge because I'd spilt all of my ball bearings in the back of the police car. They were everywhere. They were on the back seat, they're on the floor and everything.
Good way to start a police relationship, dropping your balls. Yeah.
And that was an experience, but the experience got worse when I got home, you see, because I was fearful of what Dad was going to do to me, because Dad was a truck driver, and he used to be involved in penciling for bookmakers, see. And he had a pretty sort of individual disposition, my father. He was fair, he was honest, and he never gave us any corporal punishment of any description. He only had to raise his voice to another level, and you knew. So I'm thinking, oh, I'm in for this. So when I got home, the police sort of got my mum and I said, "Is that your young bloke?" And, "Yeah, that's my eldest son," she said, with dread and on a face sort of thing. And I get out of the car and the sergeant said to me, he said, "I do not want to see your face again, young Navin, you understand?" I said, yes. But unbeknownst to me, my mother and my nana, who we were living with at the time, had different plans. What happened was, for the next week, when I got home from school, my nana, she walked me up the road to the Redfern police station. And the Redfern police station in that area was in the back lane of Redfern. And if you look down the actual hallway of the police station, and the rear doors were open, you could see the cells. And at least on 2 occasions we were there, you could see the prisoners in the cells with like their hands hanging over the bars and, you know, that gloom and doom on their faces. And every day she said to me, "Do you want to end up in there?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, you better mend your ways, stay out of trouble with the police." Every day she said that for a week. Wow. So, and I learnt. I said, okay, that was pretty savage. But then I also learnt, that punishment didn't fit the crime. It did not fit the crime. And I'm thinking, that was pretty severe for picking up, for picking up a couple of ball bearings.
You know, it is one of those things that you cross the boundary. Yes, the punishment didn't fit the crime, but to some extent, look at what it created. You know what I mean? Like it nipped something in the bud before it even started. Yeah. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who disagree, but sometimes in the appropriate way, the right correction can just stop someone from a life of crime or something much more heinous. Now, you went and joined the police in 1973, and something, my understanding is, have you ever heard of the 21 Division?
Yeah.
Right. When I mention this, a lot of people, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad used to talk about the 21 Division. I'm like, what is this 21 Division thing? And he used to speak about it with the fear of God. And my dad was a good guy, never been in trouble with the law, but he's like, if you were out drinking and the 21 Division turned up because they had different cars, you put down your glass and you got the hell out, right? Like you just did not cross those guys because they were basically the cleanup crew. If there was trouble in a space and they came through, you got cleaned up.
Yeah, well, that's 100%. That, there's no doubt about it. The strategies that 21 Division used to curb hooliganism and unruly behaviour is basically legend. It's well known. But to be in 21 Division, which was it wasn't my initial experience in plainclothes. My initial experience was, when I finished general duties working at Liverpool and Green Valley, I then decided, right, plainclothes. I'm seeing crime occur, and the individuals involved in the crime, they're basically only bottom feeders. Those at the top are giving them directions, go and do this, go and do that. So I thought, general duties work, I don't get time to investigate that aspect, and I wanted to. Yeah. Those at the top were getting all the luxury, so to speak, and the poor devils on the bottom were getting very little, except being locked up.
I think that is one of the callings of detectives is you see it at that point and you want to do more, you want to get a better result. Like GD's policing is extremely important, but if you want to impact crime, you've got to put away the big guys for a longer period of time. You've got to do it right.
Yeah, look, that's 100%. And for some reason, whatever influences those at the bottom that are doing these things, they develop this crazy loyalty to those at the top, but they can't see the fact that those at the top are getting all the ice cream and the cream, and you at the bottom are getting nothing but.
They're just exploiting them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first step after leaving that was to go into plain clothes, and I had to do that at Liverpool, which is what I did. And then as you progress through, your learning career in terms of plain clothes, it starts off pretty slow. It starts off in terms of doing, stealings, breaking enters, offences where they're not real complicated and the ingredients of the charges aren't that hard to prove. So you did the stealings and so forth. And then you move through. When you decide that you want to go further, then you make the application to go to 21 Division. So to be considered to go to a 21, you had to have done a certain amount of time in plain clothes. But 21 in those days, and they don't exist anymore, there were two purposes of 21 in those days. One purpose was gaming and betting, and the other purpose was to learn criminal investigation. So when you went there, you did a period in gaming and betting because of illegal casinos that were rampant back in the late 70s, early 80s. There was all sorts of SP bookmaking taking place. So the government decided we've got to stop this. So we're going to make 21 cover that aspect of gaming and betting. So when you'd finished that, you then progressed over to the investigative side, where you went and you studied the more complicated, serious offences that were out there, receiving high-end sort of offences that needed to be looked at. And in terms of their strategies and their deployments, there would be a general meeting of the Brains Trust. Now, so if there's, for argument's sake, there's a problem in the eastern suburbs, well, the commander of the eastern suburbs district would contact the boss at 21 Division. So we've got this problem between these hours. Can you help us? And so the answer was generally yes. And as you said earlier, what used to happen is there wouldn't be 4 or 6 21 Division guys go to the eastern suburbs between these hours where the hooligans were running rampant. That wasn't the case. The case was there would be 4 cage trucks and probably 20 ankle biters, detectives, wanting to improve their stature in the group. And I think we all recall in those days the Summary Offences Act, was pretty heavily used over there, like peeing in the streets, swearing, fighting, swearing at cops. They were all serious offences then. The courts looked down, or they frowned upon those sorts of offences actually being committed. So you'd go out there and you'd fill the cage trucks up every night if you wanted to with individuals. But the next night, or for the next 10 days, the streets were clear. There was no one there.
Yeah, because everybody knew that if you went out, you were going to, cop it and get locked up, or all the bad guys were already locked up already.
Yeah. We'll see, one of the big strategies, and I'm not sure whether I spoke to you about it, Anthony, but one of the big strategies then in that era was we went to court, and if you were fined, okay, which is what most of them were, very rarely did they go to jail for first offences involving summary offences matters. If you were given time to pay, then you went and paid the fine over a period of time. But if you never paid the fine within a certain time frame, they used to take what was called commitment warrants out then. And in those days, a commitment warrant with $100 owed, if I saw Anthony here and I knew you had a commitment warrant for $100, there's a good chance when I was at 21 I'd be talking to you and saying, listen, you've got to have $100 on you. We're going to take you to the cop shop and you're going to pay the $100, the fine, and it's squared away. But if you never, we could arrest you there and we'd take you back to the police station. And then I think you used to be able to cut out a day for $25 a day.
Yeah. So you'd spend 4 days in jail to cover a $100 fine.
Correct. Yeah. So what used to happen is the strategy on those lines we'd visit the summons and warrants police 3 days before we were going to go to Liverpool or one of the commands, and we'd see all these individuals, the local hooligans and troublemakers, and normally you'd get 5 or 6 with warrants in excess of $500, $600. So you sort of put them on your target list and away you'd go.
See, that makes so much sense in that. It's funny, when you say that, it sounds a lot like New York with the zero tolerance policing, where they went after street offences and just, things like the jaywalking, the not paying for a train fare, and, little offences to basically approach and overwhelm the crooks with just everything. Every time you step out of line, you're going to get locked up. And here they didn't like the term zero tolerance policing, so they called it maximum enforcement when I was in different commands. But it works. Proactive policing can work, 100%. But there's a push in today's society for, we don't want proactive policing, we don't want any of this proactivity, which actually I think reduces society's the benefit to society. You know, we become, as police, if you're reactive, the damage has already been done.
Yeah, look, it was a good tool, that aspect, you know. But as generally happens, sometimes the wheels fall off these tools that we have, and sadly, there's a particular reference made to a young guy that was actually arrested under those circumstances. I think he had 4 days to cut out the warrant, and they put him in. Sadly, they put him into the mainstream prison system in Long Bay.
Oh no!
What happened to him was a terrible thing. He got the daylights punched out of him, so to speak, and suffered some horrendous injuries as a result of it. And that sort of put a stop to that whole aspect of commitment warrants and having them satisfied, you know, in that way. But look, sometimes there was latitude when it comes to certain individuals. We used to be getting in the faces of anywhere criminal elements gathered, you would find 21 Division cops, and they're in hotels, football matches, racing venues. 21 Division cops, if that was going to be a target, they were there. And if you were there associating, you know, together in large groups, and you guys probably remember the old Consorting Act. Yeah. You know, it's not there at the moment in terms of it isn't as strong as it is or it was back then. Yeah. You know, the Consorting Act, if you're consorting with known criminals, so say, you know, in a period of 6 months, and you get 5 bookings for consortings, then you're going back before the courts, and there's a good chance you'll go to jail. It doesn't exist anymore.
It's virtually underutilised, if not used at all.
Never seen it used.
Yeah.
Police that I talk to, that I have these conversations with, you know, they don't understand it. How does that work? Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
How many times would you go down the street and you'd see Crook A talking to Crook B, and both convicted, and Crook C coming along and talking, like you saw it all the time. You go talk to those guys, but you weren't doing them for consorting.
But I think that's another one. There was really good investigators that would use this stuff. They would go themselves and put something together and go, here's what we're going to do. They go speak to Highway Patrol. They're like, give me a car just in that street every day. You know, using that, whether it's parking offences or traffic offences or whatever it is. And I remember one of the detectives in Bankstown following them to the barbershop and getting them all for consorting. But he was doing to disrupt the activities, and God knows how many crimes he prevented because of that. And that's the kind of thing too. I think the toolkit is around, and it's still, if you're innovative enough, you have those sort of inclinations that I'm going to use these different tools to achieve it.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I recall a particular incident in terms of, like, don't forget, the CIB then, in the early 80s, actually had a dedicated consorting squad. Yeah. And they went out, you know, they were just as busy, type of thing, you know, and they were 2 floors down from the hold-up squad where I ended up. You know, there was a bit of banter between the 2 squads in terms of, you know, arrest and so and so and so and so. That was healthy, that wasn't a problem. But, you know, the consorting squad had specific views on that sort of thing, and generally when you found the consorters were mainly up around the likes of King's Cross and those sorts of places. And the 21 Division guys, you know, to get consortings of real good crooks was a feather in your cap, so to speak. And, you know, I had some good times at 21 Division. I think, you know, I think it was called the Whaling Wall there, Darlinghurst Road. Yeah. It used to be frequented by, you know, by gay individuals, to each their own. But the big problems that came then was street workers, the girls, would turn up at that particular location as well, and before long you had them fighting each other. Yeah. You had them fighting each other, so to speak, you know, saying, you know, things like, you can't be here, this is not your time to be here, we've got to be here. We've got, you know,
and it is funny, there's like a turf war between
sex workers.
Yeah. There's a turf war between people that deal drugs, and there's turf war between street walkers and things like that.
And the crazy part about it was that the 21 Division guys would turn up in their trucks, and you'd throw them all in the back of the truck, so to speak, you know, and by the time they got from Darlinghurst Road around to the Darlinghurst Police Station, you'd open the doors to get them out, and they'd all joined forces suddenly, and they want to fight the 21 Division.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Nothing brings criminals together like a common a common enemy in the police.
They were sitting in the back of this F100 truck for about 5 minutes, and suddenly they're the best of they're the best of allies. And when the doors open, they're going to get out and try and belt the 21. Oh dear, yeah, but that's another story, isn't it?
So you went from there. You end up in Armed Hold-Up Squad, which was it always called the Armed Hold-Up Squad?
It was always called the Armed Hold-Up Squad at the CIB. What happened, when you'd finished the 21 Division, you still had what they call a bull ring.
Yes.
That you had to get through. And I remember my bull ring was basically 3 detective superintendents that were running the CIB then. And you go before them and they'd generally give you about 5 or 6 questions. You wouldn't know what they were about, but I sort of boned up on certain sections of the Crimes Act in terms of armed robberies. And fortunately, they'd asked me 3 questions, so I was really happy with that. I just nailed them. Do you know what I mean? And they basically sort of said, well, where would you like to end up? And I said, oh look, I've always had a high regard for the Hold-Up Squad detectives, and I see that being my future. It might take me a while to get there, but that's where I want to go. So I said, okay. And I made a few notes, and you sit outside, and they bring you back in and say, yep, you've done your bull ring successfully. Right, you go back to where you were at Liverpool, and then we'll give you a buzz in terms of where we're going to send you. So I said, oh, that was all right. And in that time frame, you had to go and do the detectives course, which was another level you had to reach. We looked at really, really serious crimes in terms of evidence preparation, brief preparations, and that sort of stuff. So I was fortunate. I finished in the top 10 in my D's course, so I was happy with that. And when I got back, I think it was in 2 or 3 weeks, I was offered a position at the Hold-Up Squad. So
how good's that?
And look, I think the Armed Hold-Up Squad it's probably hasn't had, it's not in its heyday now because hold-ups are way less than what they used to be. But like back in the 70s and 80s, there was hold-ups. All like armed hold-ups all the time, good crews running around doing big jobs.
Yeah, look, 100%. And when you look back to those eras, you looked at banks, you mentioned banks, like banks were doing their end of day takings. They were doing it on the counter. Yeah. They were spending $100,000 on the counter counting it basically.
And credit cards I remember the old sliders, you'd have to put the credit card in the triplicate paper, and people like Jenny, our producer, who's 20-something, has no idea what I'm talking about. But if you're my age, you understand. But
it's like the Medicare thing. If you,
it was a cash society, so that's where the armed hold-ups was. You just net thousands by doing one job.
It was just easy pickings. That's how crazy it was, But then you had the robberies and payroll vans and high end, as we used to call them, high end targets like jewellery stores. And that sort of stuff, property that was easily sort of gotten rid of, and jewellery was one, and of course cash and that sort of stuff. And but when I went to the Hold-Up Squad, I was there for about 3 years before I then moved on to the Northwest Regional Crime Squad, because regionalisation in New South Wales started around 1984. And the regionalisation of policing in New South Wales basically meant the state being chopped up into 6 or 7 different areas, and each with an assistant commissioner that had his own autonomy of that area. So what they needed to do, they knew the CIB was going to fold. So what they started doing was forming these regional crime squads in different areas, and each crime squad had their specific charter, and it was to basically investigate armed robberies, homicides, serious crime, drug offences. That was basically their charter. So you might be working on a weekend, and I might be doing Hold-Up Squad work, and someone might be doing drug squad work, and there'd be a murder down in Tunks Park or something, or within your command. You suddenly then became a homicide investigator. So away you went, and sort of managed that. But I did two tours at 2 different crime squads, Northwest and the Southwest, which was based at Flemington then. Yeah. The original one was at Penrith. So it was where I finished my plain clothes, was at the Southwest Major Crime Squad. But I learned a lot. You know, those investigative years at the hold-up squad, they were you could not get a higher learning curve in terms of investigation than working at that hold-up squad. It has its bad boys, and I'm always asked, you know, did I ever work with a certain detective sergeant there? You know, and well, yeah. Two things. I was a newbie on the block, and he wasn't going to take me into his confidence.
No, absolutely not.
And the second thing, which sort of bounced around, which I was happy with, we were like ships in the night. I was coming in to start my career. He was going out to finish his career, and he went to Darlinghurst Police Station. You know, and the crazy part about that is, you know, was that I never met. Well, when I say I never met him, I was introduced to him, and that was as far as it went. I knew my place at the hold-up squad, and he knew his place, and neither the twine shall sort of meet. But ironically, I was some years later, when I was at one of the crime squads, I was conducting an investigation on a private inquiry agent, and one of the witnesses for us in that particular crime was Roger himself.
For the prosecution or against it?
Yeah, it was. Well, he was given evidence, which he loved doing at the end of the day, and you know, he gave evidence for the Crown in that particular matter, and you know that the individual concerned was subsequently convicted. So the wheel turns a circle. As I say, Roger was going out and doing whatever he was doing, and I was coming in to start a new career, and you know there was some badness happened when I was at the hold-up squad, and I probably should preface it by saying, in my policing career, sadly, I've been in situations where close workmates have been shot and seriously injured. And my very first was when I worked at the hold-up squad. Steve Cornelis, who was a workmate of mine in the squad on the teams at the moment, he and I and two others were actually working this particular day, and there was a robbery went bad in the middle of the city, and we ended up on the Spit Bridge, and Steve was shot in the face by the offender that day, which I was standing at the back of that car, and the offender subsequently was shot dead, and then with Steve, when we talk about resilience, Steve came back to work after being shot in the face with a .32 pistol. And the bullet still, to this day, sadly Steve passed away some months back, the bullet, till that point in time I suppose, still was in Steve's body, in his shoulder. It actually went in between his eyes, went down the back of his throat, and then came and then lodged in his shoulder.
Oh goodness.
And then he's back on next job.
And he's back working on the tools within the...
Talk about tough men. That's just tough people. It's amazing.
No, it was crazy. You know, and there were three others, but they're further down the track, I suppose. Some other time to talk about.
That incident you talk of. So we've got plenty of other things to talk about, but one of the things that the reason I want to come to this just a little bit is because, by my understanding of tactical policing, this is one of the first so in our policing career, there was this standing, contain, negotiate. That was whenever you had something going horribly wrong, contain and negotiate. That's your first port of call. Now that, I think, stemmed from the fact that this job you're talking about was potentially the first job New South Wales, if not in Australia, what they'd ever seen an armed offender take hostages and then go mobile.
Yeah, we're talking about the early 80s this occurred, and what the individuals responsible for resolving high-risk incidents at that time were the Special Weapons and Operations Squad. They were a dedicated team of individuals that were specifically trained in exotic weapons, so to speak, and they include, you know, shotguns and automatic weapons and so forth. But what you're talking about is the first thing that actually was raised at the debrief issues when we talk about that was the siege was allowed to go mobile. And when you get a mobile stronghold, it's very difficult to implement containment negotiation. You can't do it. It was one of those, it was the very first, and it was, as I say, it was identified that in future, sieges will not be allowed to go mobile. That is what, that's where we ended up with that. But as you know, there's many media reports and that took us across to Manly, the suburbs over around Manly. It was like a massive Congo line is what I remember about it, particularly besides the shooting. It was like a Congo line where there were police, media, ambulance, and whoever else just following this car that had driven. And I'm talking about a car, it was a Datsun with 6 people in it. It was like peas in a pod.
Because they were human shields effectively.
They weren't going anywhere. Like the top speed of the car would have been 60 kilometres an hour with them all in it. Do you know what I mean? But they got that. They actually achieved that when they went down into a lane behind the bank. And people had just left when they knew what was going on. They just left their cars, keys in them. And these, he made them get into this little red Datsun, whatever it was. And I'm thinking when I'm watching, this is going to be interesting. Like we put a big bus at the end of the street, so he couldn't get out of the street. I thought, this is going to be interesting. So what he did was he actually did like a 10-point turn and drove up on the footpath and passed the bus, and he was off and gone heading towards Manly. So, and then the other 2 guys with us, I already mentioned Steve. There was Peter Eschman and Steve Canellis, and we're in the car directly behind him, so to speak. And wherever he went, we went. And then there was the planning. The planning was flawed. Originally, they were talking about we need to get the Spit Bridge up so that when he gets to the bridge, he can't go anywhere. So we come around the corner as you come down towards the Spit Bridge, and sure enough, the bridge wasn't up. So he just drove straight across it and kept going.
Oh,
yeah. So, but it was totally bizarre. Even though the end result was tragic, it was totally bizarre. Like, he had time. He'd actually rung his girlfriend from the bank and said, "I want you to pick me up at such and such a location." Seriously, we find obviously this is found out later on when after the incident, and we were sitting behind him, and he lets one go out of the car, a hostage, and she comes up and gets in the car and drives off. I had no idea. What's going on here? How did that happen? Did that just happen? Yeah, it happened, all right. And so they're heading back towards Sydney then. So they persist with the Spit Bridge being raised. This time it was. And there were snipers who were going to sort of finish it. But what happened was, when he got to the point of the stopping point, he decided to reverse and then head back up towards the police that were forming the other side. But he wasn't going anywhere. Yeah. So the vehicle stops, and then that's where the end result eventuates. It was just it was a sad time in that regard. But Beatty Eyes, or Steve, basically came through the whole incident. Even though he came back and kept doing whole-up squad work. It was very odd, but it was, I wouldn't say that it was a highlight. It was just one of those things that you don't forget. In terms of what took place, and I remember, before he was actually shot, there was a sniper standing next to me, and he was using an M4 or an AR rifle. And the ejection ports for that are on the right-hand side, the round projections. And I was standing next to him, and they come out and they drop down the front of my shirt and they burnt.
They're very hot, yeah.
They burnt. I was like, oh, wow, get away from you. And they were first flying out, and they're going, so to speak. But yeah, it was clear that once Adahan was got out of the vehicle, he was beyond any sort of medical help at the end of the day. Yeah. And the coroner, rightly found that it was a justifiable homicide, and that was the end of that.
Well, I think moving on from there then, we might take a break there. Yeah. Coming on next, we can talk about probably one of the first mass casualty shooting events in Australia's history, which you were responded to.
Yes.
And then we'll go on after that. So we'll take a short break and we'll be back very soon. Back from the break, everyone. And Paul, thanks for sticking with us. I thought you might have run out the door in that short period of time.
No chance.
Mate, I want to take you now to, I think it was 1991 you said.
Yeah.
What's commonly known or referred to as the Strathfield Massacre. Now, this is probably the first big mass casualty active shooter event that was seen in New South Wales, by my understanding. Can you run us through your experience of that?
Yeah, look, the Strathfield Massacre, basically, it occurred when I was working at the Major Crime Squad Southwest region at Flemington. It was a Saturday afternoon, actually, and there was only a small crew on. The day was basically come to work, check the synopsis, what's happened across the state, correspondence, court briefs, and then my added role then was I was a reasonably senior sniper then on the tactical teams. Even though I wasn't full time, I was an on-call asset, so to speak, should situations arise where my capabilities were going to be used.
And how many officers would have that, like, sort of skill set in your time?
At that time, probably 4. There'd just be 4 of us. And if it was one of those, it's probably one of those jobs or a capability that an asset that an organisation has, but it's not real well known across the general community of policing. So yeah, so part of that was the maintenance of my particular weapons that particular day, and could have been three sniper guns that needed maintenance, and then on top of that, your other exotic weapons like your M4s or your AR-15s, whichever weapon you were using, whichever model it was. So I was sort of hammering away getting that done, and the boss was a detective inspector named Stan Owens. And Stan was he was an ex-consorter, and there were races on that afternoon at Rose Hill. So he said, you and I were going out to Rose Hill, I want to see a informant. So, okay, don't worry, boss, I can get that done. Let's go. Can I finish cleaning these? He said, no, we got to go. I said, okay. So, long story short, we drove to Rose Hill, and it was August, and it was reasonably cold, and there's a wind blowing, and I thought, I don't need to get out of the car to go and see your informant. You can do that, can't you? He said, yeah, I prefer you don't know who that person is. So I was like, it was common. It's, so I said, yeah, that's fine. So I sort of sat in the car, and the sunshine was coming through, and 2 of my pages went off. I had one for the crime squad, and I had another for my SWAS on call one, the snipers page. They both went off. And generally, in those days, the first thing you think about is they're just testing their page of tests. Probably nothing in it. Not going to worry about it too much. So Stan sort of then comes running back. He said, have your page has gone off? I said, yeah. I said, I've tried to get through to the duty officer at the communications centre, but I can't get through. And that, I should have gelled then, because generally when you can't get through to the DOI and your pages have gone off, it generally means you've got negotiators ringing, you've got other SWAT on-call operators ringing, saying what's going on, where do we have to go? So there's this young uniform guy there, and he says, mate, well, have you heard what's going on down at Strathfield? I said, no. So I'll come and have a listen. So I walked in and I listened to the Strathfield radio channel, and nothing, all it was coming over was there are many casualties, both deceased and seriously injured at the Strathfield Mall, and the shooter is still on the loose. I thought, well, no, it can't be happening. Is that right? So Stan says, listen, we better make some phone calls. I said, no, we can't make phone calls. We've got to go. We can't be sitting here. So on the way, to get from Rose Hill to Strathfield, I had to go past Flemington, which is where my weapons were, and I just grabbed one of the M4s or the AR models that was there, put it in the car, and pushed about six magazines into my suit top and my pants pocket. You know, I'm walking around
Just like as you would. Drive past, pick up a sniper rifle.
The best armed detective you've ever seen in New South Wales.
Well, they're 30-round magazines, like, you know, they're about that long, but, you know, about that wide, you know, and I'm trying to stuff them down my pants to make sure I had plenty of comfort, for want of a better word. So by the time we got down there, it became clear that someone inside who was still on the loose had done some really terrible things in there. So when I got down there, there was something like 4 or 5 entries to the actual Strathfield Plaza itself. And it was 3 stories. There was parking on the top, and then the bottom level was basically shops and cafes and eateries and that sort of thing. So I thought, okay. So Stan had run over to the makeshift command post, and you can imagine it was mayhem. It was just controlled mayhem. There was no conscious effort in terms of finding out how many cops had gone in this entrance, how many cops had gone in that entrance, who was inside, who wasn't inside, what the status was inside. And even while we're standing there talking to Stan, there were shots being fired from the roof. The individual wasn't shooting down onto the police, so to speak. Across the road is the actual Strathfield railway station. He was cracking rounds off towards people walking to the railway station. He was seriously disturbed. So Stan sort of comes over and says, he said, "You can't be standing there." He said, "You've got to go in there and find this bloke." And then I thought, oh well, okay. I've got uniform cops in there, and I'll be walking around in there with in plain clothes, carrying that weapon. So I need to find a uniform guy that's going to go in with me and sort of have my back when I go in there. So fortunately, there was a uniform guy standing next to me. He had some ribbons on, and it sort of said to me, he's been in some conflicts. They were actually war ribbons. I said, "Mate, this is what's got to happen." I said, "I need you to come in there. All I want you to do is just look after my back. As I go past shops, you make sure that no one comes out of the shops and gets at my back. That's all I want you to do." Of course, I'm certainly waiting for other SWAT guys to arrive, but they were 45 minutes away, some of them. Yeah. It just wasn't doable to sort of stand there and wait for them. He's on top of the roof shooting down at people on the railway stations. So I agreed with Stan. I said, "Mate, I'm in." So away we went, and I sort of went in the closest entry point to where I was standing, and I don't even think some of the command elements didn't even know that I was going in there, which suited me at the end of the day. And communications, they were all over the shop. If you couldn't talk to someone, they were just jammed. And it's typical of such an event. Yeah. Comms just get jammed, and you can't communicate who's in there and who's not. So I sort of took that approach, and I had the uniform guy with me, so that would indicate to uniform guys in there that I'm a friendly and I'm not the person responsible. So when you walk in originally into the entry point, you walk in and there were shops that had just been clearly abandoned. There were shopping bags. It was a probably nondescript sort of atmosphere. But what also was probably descriptive was the silence. It was just nothing. It was nothing. I couldn't even hear the uniform guys talking. But as we progressed further into the open sort of vestibule where there were different shops, different cafes stuck in the middle, and the main one that was stuck in the middle that caught my eye straight away had like a white picket fence around the actual cafe. It was open air, and there were seats and chairs and stools, so to speak, and long lounges that people sat on. And I sort of approached it reasonably softly and quietly, and I picked up on 2 uniformed guys. They were sort of pointing in that direction, indicating that that's which way he's probably gone, and that's the direction they were pointing was in terms of the escalators. So he's heading towards the escalators. Having reached that point, the open area, I then started to focus on my surroundings. I wanted to look for the threats, where the threats would be coming from. Moving forward, I then caught a glimpse of the internal part of the actual cafe. And when I saw what I saw there, I sort of shook my head a little bit, and I'd seen many crime scenes in the past, and I sort of shook my head and thought, I'm imagining this. I'm going to go down on one knee, take a couple of deep breaths, and I'm going to come back up. When I come back up, that's not going to be there. It won't be there. When I did that and come back up, it was still there. So I moved forward for a better observation, not so much of the crime scene. I moved forward for a better location in case he came back. I wanted to have that area covered, but he wasn't going to surprise me. But as I moved to that location, then it became evident of the crime scene itself. There were bits, there were bullet holes in the wall right beside me. There were evidence of the best way to probably address this without being too insensitive. There was evidence of clear head wounds that were displayed on the wall. And so forth. I moved forward, and then I got the full view of the actual crime scene itself. And I tried not to be distracted. I needed to focus on where he was coming from. But briefly, in what I saw, they were the first 5 bodies I saw. It was basically the shop owner was in the kitchen. He was clearly dead. There was a young girl that was laying on a bench. She'd been stabbed in the back. There were 2 older women behind her that had suffered gunshot wounds to most of their body, and there was another young girl sitting opposite the first 2 bodies that I saw, and she was clearly deceased as well, sadly. So I kept moving around, and I'm thinking, gunshots, they're still happening. So I'm thinking he's still active. So by the time I got fully encircled the actual outdoor cafe, I saw another body, and it was a female, who later on I found out was the mother of a survivor of this shooting. She was actually in the restaurant itself, looking at Frankham conducting his check on his weapon and the knife, and she saw the killings take place. She survived, but as I got further around, I saw this particular woman laying near the entrance, and again the crime scene was pretty. It was pretty ugly. So I kept moving forward, and there's another body in a nearby chemist shop. So at this stage, there's 7 people, and that didn't include the people that had already been shot and had survived and were getting medical treatment outside. So by the time I got to the escalators to go up, I hear footsteps coming down the escalator. So I'm thinking, right, it's not a problem. I'm ready for this. So I took my appropriate stance. My shooting platform, I was happy with that. I was waiting, and I wasn't going to give him a chance to crack rounds off at me first. I was going to go first. But fortunately, coming down the stairs, the footsteps belonged to uniformed blokes, and they were screaming at the top of their voice, "He's dead. He shot himself upstairs." And I'm thinking, okay, not a problem. I'm happy with that. And I sort of went into, tell me how that happened. And he explained how it happened. He'd actually taken a woman hostage up there. She was parking a car. He'd actually taken her hostage, made her drive down to the next level, gave her instructions, I want you to drive out of here and leave. Got down to the next level, out of the blue said, "Stop the car." She stopped. He got out of the car, went down beside the vehicle and killed himself. She survived. Why he did it, I don't know. Only he knows that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? But when you look through the damage that he'd done upstairs, I recall, individuals that one particular individual, he'd actually took cover under his car. The problem for him was his feet were still sticking out. And as Frankham was walking past, he decides to shoot him in both legs. Oh. It was crazy. And he'd kill himself. And Frankham was an individual that, as it's later turned out, he seriously had a troubled past. He was a taxi driver. He had serious psychological issues. He was broke, psychological issues involving sexual fantasies and a few other things. So by the time I went back out and said to Stan, you know, he's done, he said, all right, he said, not away, put your gear away. And I said, yep, not a problem. So that was my tactical head being in place for that particular episode. Stan then said to me, after, he said, you need to be involved in the investigation stage of this as well. So my tactical hat went off and my investigative hat went on. So I was left now with other detectives, senior detectives from the crime agencies at Flemington, to now prepare a brief for the coroner in terms of what took place. So having said that, I knew that I needed to go to the hospital, the Concord Hospital, and do some things at the hospital in terms of medical records and you know, organising the situation with the deceased and where they were and where they were going to go, which wasn't a problem. There I met a young girl. I think it's best I probably refer to her as a survivor. She was there worrying about the condition of her mother. And I knew when I spoke to her that the last body that I saw was her mother. She didn't know that yet. And she obviously believed that, you know, Mum had survived, but sadly that wasn't the case, it wasn't to be. So, and I met her and introduced myself and mentioned, you know, where we were going to go with this inquiry, and she said she was basically really resilient about, you know, if whatever I can do to help, given she'd seen everything he did while he was preparing for his badness. So the next day, you know, when things sort of settled down somewhat, I went and saw a couple of psychologists that were there for the debriefing for a lot of the police and others. And I had a conversation. I said, how would I go? You know, this is the situation with this girl. She's critical to the coroner's inquiry. How would I go if I were to do with her at this early stage a walkthrough, a video walkthrough, right? Instead of getting a typed statement from her, I thought, well, no, I could end up with a statement that's 100 pages long, and it's not going to do it justice. So I thought, I will do a video walkthrough. And they said, well, what does that mean? Basically, the psychologist said, what does that mean? I said, well, I'll just organise for the video unit to be present on this date. She will be there. We'll wire her up. I will go through the issues with her, and then we'll record it. The interview took 13 minutes. They said, yep, do it. She won't be a problem, given the circumstances in which she had to explain things, mate, you know. So she was on side with that. So this particular day, yep, we met up, and it was only be 24 hours later, maybe not even that. Yeah, but 24 hours later. And the crime scene had not been cleaned. It was, the only thing that wasn't there were clearly, you know, the bodies. And the crime scene was there. I'm talking about, you know, floors bloody, and I'm talking about holes in the walls, you know, tables overturned, cups and saucers where Franklin had sat drinking his coffee all mornings while he waited to do this. And more importantly, what I did see and what I focused on was the area where her mother was. There were large pools of blood and efforts that had been made to save a life. They were still there. And because I've got my own demons on my shoulder, you know, having seen it, and I'm thinking, oh, God, that's a bit of a demon for me. How's it going to be for her? She was good with it. Away we went and described what Frankham did, how he did what, how he took aim to do this, how he done this. It was very intricate, and she gets to the point where we talk about her mother, and she talks about her mother putting herself between Frankham and the survivor, and her mother's continually pushing, go to that service exit, keep going, crawl as quick as you can. She did that. She did what her mother said, And she got to the service exit, basically, and closed the door behind her, and then she heard more gunshots. And she was thinking, gunshots. I've got 100 metres to go from one end of the service exit to safety on the street. So, for some reason, she said, no, I'm going to have a look and see what's taking place. She opens the door. She didn't see her mother, but her mother was dead then. Those gunshots that she heard were Frankham killing mum. She looks out of the service door and standing there is Frankham looking at her. And he's changing the magazine on the gun. Changing the magazine on the weapon. Incredible, mate. Yeah, it's crazy. And she then decides, slamming the door, and she's off running. She's off running. And when we were talking to her, or when she was talking to me, she said, Paul, I didn't know what to expect halfway down that hallway. I didn't know whether I'd feel the bullet hitting me and me dying and what it would be like, or was I just going to get to safety and he wasn't going to shoot me? The latter happened. He never shot at her. He just kept going up the stairs. Now, why he didn't do anything with her, only Frankham knows. No one else. He let her live when he could have easily just opened the door, cracked a few more rounds off and got himself another victim.
And when you're talking about the firearms and changing magazines, did he have a combination of firearms? Did he have long arms and short arms? What was the situation?
Mate, he had an SKS 7.62 rifle. Okay, and it's just the magazine changes. He had about three or four magazines from memory, but he fired 50 rounds. Right? He fired 50 rounds in 10 minutes. And if you think about it in terms of a gun expert that can change rounds, or change magazines rather, really quickly, to change 3 rounds, or rather 3 magazines, inside 2 minutes wouldn't be hard. But it's a matter then of emptying the gun of the 30 rounds and then changing again. So he'd managed to use at least 3 magazines during his daylight escapades. So, but she survived. So it's just a matter of one magazine off, new magazine on, charge the handle on the weapon, and away you go again. So, and that particular weapon, if you just keep the finger on the trigger, it'll just keep firing. So it wouldn't be a problem to do what he did in under 10 minutes. So, there were times during that walkthrough that I had my own demons in terms of, I don't want to see this again. I sort of had to suck in air the first time to get over it, but she was good, and the matter went to the coroner, and the coroner sort of highlighted the fact that this was the first time and that this type of interview was done, and it greatly showed a different aspect of what had taken place instead of a paper document.
So, sorry, just to pick you up on that, this is the first time the coroner's seen a video walkthrough with her.
That's my understanding. Yeah, absolutely right.
Amazing, because that's, from an outsider's perspective, as a detective, it's not a common thing, but it's fairly well known for usage in such cases, or homicides or serious offences, when you really want to explain to a jury or a judge how the environment influenced a particular action taking place, and to give the full scenery and the extent of something, and assist victim recall and witness recall as well. And look, video technology, again, going back, we're talking about the early 90s. It wasn't just like, hey, you've got it on your phone like you do now. There's a lot of resourcing and a lot of expense in that. That's pretty amazing.
And I'm more than, I'm happy to say, and I've had this conversation with younger detectives, my understanding is, and these young detectives have continually told me that particular walkthrough is continually shown on detectives courses in terms of, what the benefits are. Look, my understanding was then walkthroughs were quite regularly done with suspects,
Yes.
not so much witnesses. Do you know what I mean? So suspects were subjected to that sort of stuff, crime scenes, yeah, I did this, etc. But with a witness, we're talking about, it's a totally different aspect that, you know, that needs to be looked at. And I'm not sure whether or not they still do it. I imagine that they would. I would hope that they would. Because to my way of thinking, it's better than sitting, in my day, at a typewriter, you know, typing a 50-page statement of what took place, when that can so easily solve that problem. You just don't get a full grasp of reading a statement in that circumstance.
Just for those people who don't know, do you recall how many people how many people were injured and how many people died in that event?
There were 7 killed, and there were, as far as the injuries were concerned, I know that there were quite a number of injured taken to Concord Hospital and Prince of Wales Hospital. I interviewed 2 people at the Prince of Wales Hospital, in particular a guy that tried to get under his car, and sadly he got shot in the legs, and that caused him some disturbing problems later in his life, which was a tragedy, which was sad. But you know, anyone that was involved in that would have had serious psychological issues to deal with, you know, after that. And as far as the other guy's concerned, you know, Frankham, I went and did a search warrant on his home, and there were knife sharpening stones in there where he sharpened the knife to carry out what he was, carry out the murder of that young girl. She was 16 or 17. He just stabbed her in the back. It was a terrible sight.
All right, we're just going to take a break there. Paul, you're doing amazing. We love hearing these, but I know time is a factor because you got an appointment. So what we'll do, people, is just take a small break, and then we'll jump back into what we were speaking about, Trump, and then we'll go from there. All right, we're back from the break, guys. Apologies, we were so focused on the story that we actually forgot to check the charge on the cameras, so that's why we had to close that off very quickly. But do not worry, because Paul has agreed to come back in for another episode with us, and I know Paul's got another thing to go to straight after this, so we're going to jump straight out of Strathfield, and there's so much more to dig into there, mate. But because it's very topical and because you are the expert in the room, I've admitted before that I've got a shooting license and I've pulled a trigger, but it's fair to say anything I've ever done is nowhere near, not even in the same universe as what you've done, my friend, and I want to make that very clear. So, look, as I said at the outset, you were trained sniper, you've had training from the SAS, you've trained with FBI, Secret Service, you've done operations all over the place, and done hostage rescues and armed takedowns, etc. We're just honestly in the break talking about a call-out incident where police were pinned down under fire, and Paul and his team, one of 4 guys, managed to resolve that situation, resulting in the safe rescue of a bunch of cops that were pinned down. So look, I delve into something we spoke about a couple of episodes ago, and that was the attempt on Donald Trump. Now, you would have a very unique perspective because you've been a team leader for assault groups and tactical groups, something that the average person doesn't understand. Tell me, you've seen the footage that we've seen. And you've worked with some of the agencies that are involved. When you look at this, what do you see? What's your expert opinion based on the information you have available to you?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say, first off, I'm not totally aware, or more so, the individuals that were on the ground that day have a situational perspective or an awareness of what took place. So from my perspective, I'm an outsider looking in, but I think I can certainly address aspects of the response from the Secret Service sniper teams. And more importantly, I think I can probably address the issues, in my views, on the actual shooter himself. And then when we combine those together, I think I will come up with a certain perspective on the shooter. I think you've got to understand first and foremost is Secret Service and any sniper organisation across the world, they all prepare operational orders for different pre-planned operations. We're all the same. The orders groups generally contain the same thing. And you will find, I'll be very surprised if it's not there in their operational orders group. And I've trained and worked with the Secret Service and FBI on dignitary protection for their presidents when they've been here in Australia. The FBI, when they've been here with Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice, we generally train together for a few days beforehand, and then we go into an operational stance. But in terms of their operational orders and even orders that the TOU and tactical teams here in Australia use, there are different components in an operational orders group. But one of the components that is critical when it comes to what happens if this scenario presents is called an actions on part of the orders group. And in that action on orders group, you will find probably between 1 to 5 scenarios that may create and what the expectations are in terms of what we're going to do about it. So for argument's sake, and we'll just touch on the Trump issue, the actions on may be relevant to a person seen on a roof. Sniper sees the person on the roof. The actions on will be, I have a person on the roof. I need troops on the ground to go and investigate that person on the roof. Full stop. I will maintain surveillance of the person. Yes. That's what he will say. It will then go to his command element, and then what should happen at that command element, they will have control and command of the individual resources on the ground. So they will allocate that particular job to one of those sources on the ground. They can be close, they can be far away. And that then creates a problem. And that problem is these things are not done in a split second. If they need to find resources to go to that roof, it may be 5 or 10 minutes. And unfortunately, in that 5 or 10 minutes, there's a variable enters or comes into the man on the roof, e.g. he may have a gun. So you look up your on call, your actions on, again, man on the roof with a gun, relay the intelligence, the communications back to the command post, and then you maintain as a sniper your surveillance of the individual. Already the line in the sand for those snipers is creeping up to a point where they may use lethal force to finish or ballistically intervene in this operation. While the line in the sand is creeping forward, if there's no news in terms of what's going on with that man on the roof, or the team sent there, the snipers are dwindling. Their actions are dwindling in terms of he has this in his hand now, he's laying down, he's taking a stance. The snipers then make a call, and it's their call alone. Nobody else can tell a sniper, whether it be, especially here in Australia, when to engage an offender and use lethal force. It may be different in the US, I don't know, but having worked with the counter sniper teams, I know that we all basically sing off the same sheet. We all know that I'm going to squeeze the trigger, I'm going to have to justify why I do it. So then that line gets crossed and they engage lethal force. So the problem that I see there with that aspect is they've followed their actions on, we've contacted the command element, the time frame between that and the engaging of the target on the roof dwindled. So you have communication breakdowns, and it's part of the US I don't know, psych, I suppose, you get responding to these particular incidents or deploying operationally, maybe 5 or 6 different law enforcement bodies.
Yes. Yep.
And so therein starts the communication breakdown. If part A is to let part B know you need to go and do A, B, C and D, well, that may take 5, 10, 15 minutes to do. I'm just reading between the lines and seeing what I'm seeing. I would say that's clearly has been a major problem for them.
Yes. Yep.
So then if you move forward to the next area that I'd probably need to address and that I've looked at, it's the shooter himself. The shooter himself is a young male. Clearly, from what I'm aware, his skill levels in terms of using a rifle was limited, restricted, so I understand. But if you take that into account and you put yourself in the headspace of that person on the roof, you need to think of these variables that's going through that person's headspace. And the first thing you need to ask is he using alcohol? Is he on some sort of drug bender? Why is he there besides the obvious mission, and that is to shoot Mr. Trump? What's pushed him to get there? So when you put him there and he's got those things in his headspace to start with, you start to look at the individual and say, does he have the capability to carry out what he wants to do? So having come to a point where he says, yes, I can. You then have to look at the action of him squeezing the trigger. Now, snipers use various stances or positions when they shoot. And that can be prone, which is laying down, can be kneeling, can be supported on a bench, whatever the case may be. But you've got to remember, from a sniper's perspective, there were 8 rounds fired here. The first two rounds fired from that weapon would give away his position. So in his headspace straight away is, as soon as I crack these 2 rounds off, I'm going to be shot dead. Now, if you multiply that by how many times he's had that going through his head, the intensity of that would cause most of us to think you've got to be strong-willed to do it, to know what's going to happen. So the first 2 rounds go, he has that in his headspace. The following 8 rounds, you have to consider this. He's going to be shooting a weapon now that is going to have recoil. Every time a round fires, recoil comes in and it changes your position. It changes the comfortable position that you've got as a shooting platform. So when you fire the next 3 or 4 rounds, the recoil is bouncing off his shoulders, so his accuracy is going to go in another direction because the recoil has changed his position of comfort. Now, if he hasn't trained or compensated for that, then he's going to have problems hitting the target. And that leads to the next, which I think is fairly significant. Any marksman that I've trained, you start them off on a basic level. I think we spoke about it before. I can put you 2 guys, you 3 people in front of an M4, and within 2 hours, I'll have you hitting the centre body mass of that target, which is waist up to the head at 100 metres, 150 metres. I will have you hitting it. So the question that I ask is, why would he focus on shooting or making a headshot with 2 rounds, right, when he could have easily made the 8 rounds that he'd fired impact on a person the size of Donald Trump?
That's a good point.
Do you know what I mean?
And I think there's probably a few conspiracy theorists out there that say that must be part of the reason why it's a conspiracy. But also, I mean, you can tell me, I don't know too many guys that would bet their life on being able to shoot someone in the ear.
Well, it's just indicative, Anthony, of the fact that where I'm coming to. I think my belief is that he had no idea about how that weapon would fire.
Yeah.
He had no idea on the compensation that he would have to put in to the firing of that weapon of 8 rounds. I don't, and that's therein lies the problem where we get the rounds being scattered and going into the crowd, sadly, and killing one and injuring 2 others. It's just, and on top of that, we've got what his headspace is all about. What's he affected by? Is he conscious of this? Is this the last breath I'm going to take? Because I'm going to be killed any minute. And all these things, and then on top of that again, you've got his position and his comfort shooting zone being disrupted every time he squeezes that trigger.
That's right.
And like I noticed, he wears glasses.
Yeah.
I would love to know where the glasses come in. Are they as a result of deficient eyesight, and he's got to wear glasses? Where does that fit in? That's a critical part to my way of thinking.
It is too, because my understanding, well, I wear glasses, and when I shoot with glasses, it changes how you use a scope, for instance. It changes where you position yourself on the rifle. Yeah,
100%. That's right, exactly right. And he's in a laying position, and if you've got an M4 or an AR, whatever, I don't even know whether there were optics on the weapon or whether he was just using open sights. If he's using open sights, which is a sight at one end and a sight at the next end, your clarity in terms of your point of impact is going to be clouded tenfold, especially if you're using, if you've got to use glasses. So that adds more weight to the fact, to my view, in terms of he wasn't shooting for a headshot. I would hope, if I'm in his shoes, I'm going to say, well, I know I can put 8 rounds into a target Mr. Trump's size at 140 metres. I'm going to shoot at the body mass. And that way, I only need 1 round or 2 rounds to hit, and it's going to tear apart some of his vital organs. So, and that goes on top of, this simplistic equation. What do I want to do? I want to achieve this? Yep, this is how I'm going to do it.
Do you think he was, my thoughts on that was, is it possible that he was taking that headshot because he thought there was body armour potentially involved, or because he thought that the chance of him surviving a body shot was increased, whereas a headshot would increase the likely lethality?
Look, it depends. No doubt, looking at Mr. Trump, the body armour that generally is exposed to people is a really thick armour that you wear outside. Yes. Right? I would dare say that he would be wearing covert body armour, which is a lot thinner than the normal body armour you see worn outside. So, depending on the grain of the round he was using, at 150 metres, there's a good chance that body armour will be pierced.
Yes. By,
if not 1, maybe 4 out of 8 rounds. There's a good chance it's going to cause some serious damage to you. I don't know. I just see that the rounds that, even though Mr. Trump was struck in the ear, and I had this when I had this conversation with a few reporters from the Daily Telegraph. My original views were that a bullet hasn't hit him. It's more likely that a fragmentation from one of the 8 has hit him.
Does make it, that's a very good argument, actually, you can think about it like that.
Yeah, and one of the biggest problems is when your projectile is in flight, is to avoid man-made obstacles. Yes. He may have started off thinking, right, I've got a clear line of sight, I'm happy, but as he progressed through the rounds being shot, what starts to happen is the weapon starts to become loose in the shoulder, your laying stance becomes less packable, and your rounds, they start going everywhere.
That's right, you start getting some flyers.
And I'm not sure in terms of the weapons maintenance, but you've done some shooting. It's a situation of, if I point a weapon in this direction, bang, and I zero that weapon to 100 metres, I know where 5 rounds are going to go. They're going to go in a keyhole, shot. Okay, so 5 rounds are going to hit, and the 5 rounds are going to be together grouped as a keyhole. I know that, right? But if he hasn't done that and zeroed that weapon to a degree where he shoots confidently with it, and you compensate for the action of the recoil, you compensate for the roof, sliding on the roof, you've got to have all those adjustments in place where you want that round to go initially.
All right, we're back from another surprise technology outage. Sorry to interrupt you there, Paul. Look, we kind of finished on, I think we were going through some of those points with regards to the shooter, in regards to Trump there, and I think you highlighted some very good points on just how difficult it is shooting. People that don't shoot don't have a good understanding of that. Yeah. One thing you did mention in the break, which I think is important to point out, is from your perspective as a team leader, a tactical team, 20 years experience, and a very accomplished sniper, that you felt the shooting from the sniper detail on that day was proficient.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Once they identified the fact, or things had escalated, probably from their first intel flow, they progressed through the actions on, I would dare say, and from there the ultimate use of lethal force followed. And I think, given that they were totally justified. But having said that, we're talking about the United States and what they have to say in terms of their use of lethal force, when it's justified and when it's not.
Indeed. You know? Well, look, I know you've got another appointment to go to, so we have run out of time, which is a shame because you've got 1,000 other stories to do for us. But look, we've already locked Paul in for another couple of episodes because, as I said in the beginning, I'm fanboying. I love hearing the old stories from the old days. Look, I want you guys, if you're a follower of us, when we have Paul back on, please keep in the back of your mind that Paul's written a book, or he's in the process of writing a book, the working title of Faces of Resilience. I think if you've paid any attention to this and you listen to the stories, the stories he's told us in the break are as good as the one he's told us here today, and that's why we're so keen to have him back. But I think you're the embodiment of good cops, true workhorse of policing, and really a very unique character. And we've been very privileged as people on the podcast to have you come in as hosts, but also I think in New South Wales, people in New South Wales are privileged to have had you serve them. So look, thank you very much for your service. Thank you for coming on today. I can't wait to get you back in.
Okay.
Guys, stay tuned for Faces of Resilience. That will be coming out sometime in the not too distant future, and we'll definitely make an announcement about that when it does. We are sponsored, as always, by the good people at IC Technology, and you'll find them at ictechnology.com.au. And if you're trying to find us, you can find us at the sign behind us, Precision Integrity. You can find us at privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au. And look, thank you again, Paul. Great to have you on the show. Danny's mic ran out ages ago, so he's sitting off to the side. And I think that'll just about do us for today. Thank you, team. We'll see you next time.